All right, folks, we are here, and this is somewhat less than what we expected, but in the spirit of broadcast, Logan, which we have seen all our lives, we're going to use the phrase technical difficulties, and that's what we've experienced with our first crack at a Google Hangout video chat, folks. Something else Robbie Ward told us. We got to look at that camera.
We do.
Okay.
We do. I've tried to.
Yeah, and we're looking at the camera right here, folks. And I'll tell you, we've had some technical difficulties, but something that we're going to do right now is we're going to talk some SEC football. And I'm Parrish Alford. This is Logan Lowry. We're with the Daily Journal, and we're going to straighten out our difficulties, but right now we're coming to you with something tried and true from our hotel room across from the Galleria here in Hoover, Alabama. And we'll talk about the Hangout. That's an exciting project that we're working on that we really would like to bring to you all during football season on a weekly basis, just coming to you on the blogs, just talking football with updated news and numbers, talking about the games of the week and the storylines. All that's coming down the pike. Right now, we're going to talk media days a little bit. We got 2 days in the books. One of those includes Mississippi State. Logan's going to talk about that a little bit. Ole Miss coming up on Thursday, the final day of media days here. Hugh Freeze will be one of the last coaches to take the podium in the icy cold ballroom. Logan, today though, that was Dan Mullen. Did you hear anything that you weren't expecting to hear? Anything that surprised you out there?
Nothing really surprised. I mean, I think a lot of people probably were kind of maybe been surprised to say that Dan Mullen, expects to go to Atlanta and play in the SEC championship game. And
well, that's where you go to compete for championships in Mississippi. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, go ahead.
But it's just one of those things that he mentioned that all 7 teams in the West should be attaining to try to go there, and he thought that all 7 teams in the West were capable of going there. I mean, they're and I guess if you look at Auburn's season last year, they were predicted to finish 5th in the SEC West.
And I poke fun at Dan a little bit because the compete for championships things, he wasn't really getting close, and that was kind of wearing thin, and maybe that's why he stopped it. But I will say this: if there was a year where everybody in the West could talk about a championship, I don't know that this is it, but it's closer maybe than we have been. We've seen Alabama win national championships with a first-year quarterback 2 times, not once, but twice. So the idea that they have a new quarterback, I don't know that necessarily means they're going to drop, but there's a lot of change going on at LSU.
There is.
There's a lot of turnover at LSU, and certainly Texas A&M, while we've seen the recruiting rankings and we know that they have continued to recruit well under Kevin Sumlin, they're losing the most dynamic player in college football for the last 2 years.
And his top receiver.
Yeah,
and one of the best offensive linemen. So they're missing some holes. And you mentioned LSU. They're got a new quarterback there as well. Mettenberger's gone. Lost a couple of those dynamic receivers that they had there too. So I think the West is wide open. But I still think when you talk SEC West and the championship there, you have to mention those 3 teams and Auburn as well.
Absolutely. And when I think about Auburn, I mean, I know they're going to be picked high when the SEC preseason poll comes out later this week. A lot of those are based on what you accomplished last year, and Auburn accomplished quite a bit. But I go back to how Auburn's season unfolded. And you and I talked about this earlier today. So many close games, so many bizarre plays, so many things that went Auburn's way, and you can't factor that in every year. You can't budget that and say that's going to happen.
Exactly. I mean, I wrote a story on that in Tuesday, or I guess it was Wednesdays. I'm losing track of days here in Hoover, but I wrote it in one day.
Wrote it this week.
This week at some point, I wrote a story about Auburn. Just talked about all those close wins. They won 12 games last year. 6 of those games were 10 points or less, and 4 of those games were won within the final 1 minute and 19 seconds left in the ball game. One of those wins was against Mississippi State. Won the game with 10 seconds left to go. Mississippi State had them on the ropes on the Plains last year and let that game slip away. Nick Marshall just drove the ball right down the field, and to the pass to C.J. Uzomah, or however you pronounce his name, in the back of the end zone there, and won the ball game. State had one play after that, and it was all over.
And I think of the Ole Miss game at Auburn last year, and I think of Ole Miss not playing well, playing poorly, and even in spite of that, with about 8 minutes to go in the game, having the ball, pretty good field position with a chance to drive down and take the lead in the fourth quarter, and couldn't do it, turned it over. So, I mean, Ole Miss not playing well was there in the game at Auburn, had a chance to win late. So it's hard to look at Auburn in spite of the success from last year and returning their quarterback and think that's the team. It's hard to look at them, especially when they're losing Carl Lawson at defensive end. That's a big loss for Auburn. So
Trey Mason at running back.
Yeah,
I mean, Heisman finalist right there.
So
You got to replace him.
Is the West wide open? I think it's more open than it has been. I don't think you discount those traditional teams. If they're going to be there, they've recruited well. We know they've recruited well. You look at the rankings, okay? But there's a lot of reason to be excited around Ole Miss right now, and there's a lot of reason, obviously, for optimism around Mississippi State. Talking about the Bulldogs, they were here today. Dak Prescott was here. Everything I heard from him was a real effort to say the right thing, kind of a little coach speak, a little cliche. Is that what you usually hear from Dak?
Not at all. Dak's usually very candid, very open about things. But today he seemed a little bit more scripted. Seemed like they coached him up pretty well. He didn't say anything wrong or anything like that. Parrish and I we've heard so much coach speak in our careers that we know when to sniff it out and when we hear it. And a lot of what Dak said today sounded like coach speak. And he's confident in himself. He started 7 games last year, and Mississippi State's returning leading passer and rusher as well, and he's that type of leader. A lot of people talk about the it factor that Dak Prescott has. I don't know what that it is, but he certainly seems to have it. And I think Mississippi State has room to be excited this year with him at quarterback. My concern, I guess, going into the season, or kind of my big question mark going into the year is, can his body sustain 12 games of the regular season in the SEC? Because just playing part-time last year, he missed parts of 4 games and missed 2 games entirely just because of all the blows and stuff. That hit he took in the Texas A&M game kept him out of the Arkansas and Alabama games entirely.
Well, it seems to me that a popular discussion in Mississippi right now is which team has the best quarterback.
Yeah, I've heard that argument as well.
I've heard that. And I look at that and I think, well, it's really an apples and oranges thing. Mm-hmm. There are different styles. I don't think that Mississippi State will be as successful as people think if they are requiring Dak Prescott to sit in the pocket and make reads, to find a second receiver, to look downfield and make decisions like that. And I don't think that's not what they're going to ask. And I think they can be successful if teams cannot defend Dak Prescott in the run game, if he's able to get the corner, if he's able to go off tackle and break tackles, if he's able to catch that little throwback pass that is coming. Mm-hmm. But if he gets in space and becomes, Dak Prescott may not be the best quarterback in the league, but he may be the best athlete playing quarterback.
I think with Johnny Manziel gone, I think you definitely have to put him in there. And we heard Dan Mullen say today that probably only 5 to 10% of those runs that we see Dak Prescott doing out there are actually called, from the sideline. I mean, he does a lot of that is
improvisation.
Yeah, that's a tough word to say this late in the afternoon, but you know what I'm saying. But a lot of that he's doing out there on his own, making his own plays, and that's, I guess, part of that it factor that we talked about.
Well, it is, and so the quarterback discussion in Mississippi is really an apples and oranges thing right now. Ole Miss coming up on Friday. We know that Hugh Freeze will get a lot of questions about Bo Wallace. Okay, the most experienced quarterback in the SEC right now, a third-year starter. I think Ole Miss fans would like to trust him, to feel like they could trust him more, to be good from wire to wire, from start to finish during the season. When I look at Bo Wallace, I see a guy who had 17 interceptions, 22 touchdowns, but 17 interceptions as a first-year starter. Way too many interceptions. He cut that number significantly through 10 games last year. 6 interceptions through the first 10 games. People remember much poorer performances against Missouri and then Mississippi State. We know that Hugh Freeze told us the shoulder was coming into play there. There was fatigue and weakness from having not gone through the proper conditioning after surgery. You hear that, And then that theory was supported when you see how Wallace played in the bowl game after he had a month to rest. They really didn't work him much during that time, a much better bowl game. Now he's had a year after the surgery. He's had a full off season of conditioning. He's been to California to see the specialist. This team needs Bo Wallace to be good from start to finish. Ole Miss has given him a great chance to do that. I think he'll be successful, but we'll see. He'll be a third-year starter, and he's had injuries and indecision, decision-making problems really as a rookie. This is his best chance to be success. They need him to do that.
Yeah, I think the only question mark with Bo Wallace, like I said, I think he has cured up a lot of his decision-making problems. You didn't see that a whole lot last year. My biggest question mark with him is just, can his shoulder hold up? And that's something he hasn't been able to do through the first 2 years. I saw him play at East Mississippi. Mississippi State was, I was doing recruiting at that time and went down there to Scuba and watched him play. And great decision maker down there. Led them to a national title down there. And you could see what Hugh Freeze and other coaches around the SEC saw in him. And he's obviously the most experienced quarterback in the SEC returning. And I think Ole Miss is going to, their season, kind of like what you said about Dak Prescott. I think their season is kind of go with, the success of Bo Wallace out there.
I like the supporting cast around Bo Wallace. I think the Rebels are going to be deep at running back. I think they're going to find depth at receiver. It's not where they want it to be right now. I like the move of Laquan Treadwell to the outside. I think he looks really comfortable there. But to me, what could really make this team different is defense. And I'm thinking right now the two transfers, Anthony Alford in the secondary, Fadal Brown at defensive end. They didn't push the quarterback last year. They didn't get pressure on him. They didn't make the quarterback fear the rush. I think that could change this year as long as C.J. Johnson stays healthy. Fadal Brown at one end. Look, we don't know what he's going to do until he gets some games under his belt. But, he wins the springtime contest now. He wins the award there. He looks the part. And I think he's going to give them some push off that edge. Marquise Haynes could come in and provide some quickness. Anytime you start relying on newcomers, there's a risk.
Right.
Anytime you bring someone into your program who hasn't been there, there's an unknown. And so, while we talk about the potential of some of these newcomers, we really have to get some games into the season to see how they're going to play out. I'm sure there are similar situations at stake.
Right, and a lot of times you'll hear coaches talk about junior college players especially, what the adjustment is when they get into the SEC. They always seem like it takes them a half a year to kind of get adjusted to the speed of the SEC, and you'll probably see that with Anthony Alford as well. Jumping up from Conference USA, not only is he jumping conferences, he's changing positions as well. And I know he's had a year of practice at Ole Miss, at that position, but practice is a whole lot different than playing in those games. When those lights come on Saturday nights on national TV, it's a totally different thing.
It is. Now, getting away from State and Ole Miss a little bit, what have you heard at media days, the first 2 days, has kind of made you go, wow?
I think just any time Steve Spurrier opens his mouth makes me say, wow. I can sit there and listen to that guy talk all day long. I mean, he's just a quote machine. He's brutally honest. He really doesn't care what other people think of what he says. He's been around that long. And I thought that was pretty cool that I really didn't think about it, I guess, and he said he didn't either, is the fact that he's coached at two different programs within the SEC for 10 plus years, and I think that's pretty remarkable.
And you hear people say all the time that there's that 10-year window, that after 10 years there's too much familiarity and maybe a coach ought to move on. You've heard that sentiment a lot, and then to spend 10 years at two places, I don't think people were ready for him to leave from Florida after 10 years. Obviously they're not ready for him to leave from South Carolina. Steve Spurrier at media days is like, it's like sports writer Christmas. Everybody likes to listen to Spurrier because, as you mentioned, he's brutally honest, but he makes you feel at ease when he's talking. I mean, there's good-natured barbs. I think the barbs are fewer than they used to be.
Right.
But part of Spurrier's time today that intrigued me was his discussion about big money donors in college football, because he spoke of that with such an easygoing nature. How many times do we hear coaches talk about, our donors are important to us, or our contributors, our the loyalty foundation, whatever you call it. These are important parts, important components to success in modern day college football, Steve Spurrier calls out a man's name and talks about flying to the Bahamas and getting on a yacht. I mean, who talks like that?
And he compared him to NFL owners as
Right.
well.
They're like NFL owners, but they don't tell us what to do. I would argue with you on that. I think that you have instances where some donors have a whole lot of input. I think that's really good for the program. But just a very frank and casual conversation about the importance of private contributions that fund so many of the amenities that fans are so accustomed to in college football today. You think of the suites, the club level seating. You think of the big video boards at stadiums. I mean, these are improvements that aren't possible without private contributions. So an interesting discussion from Steve Spurrier on that today. I thought Kevin Sumlin's time at the podium was interesting. I thought he was a little bit combative with one question. It was a question about Johnny Manziel, and it was a question along the lines of photos on the internet, and the gist of it was behavior. And I didn't think, clearly Kevin Sumlin did not want to answer the question. And, he kind of just was kind of smart alecky in his response. But I will tell you this, in Sumlin's defense, that question was kind of long and drawn out and vague, and and it was not a good question, and it allowed Sumlin to give the response that he did. Now, he may have given that response anyway, at which point maybe he becomes the villain. But I think in this instance, the reporter clearly could have asked a better question. But Sumlin did not like fielding questions about Johnny Manziel. Referred to them as kind of like that sounds like a good question for the Cleveland Browns.
Exactly.
But interesting day with Kevin Sumlin. I'll tell you, through 2 days of media days, Logan, what I haven't seen is a big personality.
Right.
And part of that, when you have Kevin Sumlin who brings his punter. Now, guy's an All-American, he's good, but who wants to talk about a punter in August? If you're having to punt, that's not good. Okay. So, there's some things like that, but we haven't seen that big Jadeveon Clowney, Johnny Manziel type of personality, and maybe that's to come, but there hasn't been that player walk into the ballroom where everybody went over to his table.
Right, and I think it's probably as close as we've seen the first 2 days is Dak Prescott. And it wasn't anywhere to the level of Jadeveon Clowney or Johnny Manziel or anything like that, but when Dak Prescott walked in the room, it had a big media contingent follow him over, because I think a lot of people are interested with what his potential is for this year. He's created a lot of buzz in the offseason, especially if you look at the way he finished the year last year, and they had the huge bowl game out there, and it's another thing that Mississippi State brought a guy that you saw Texas A&M brought their punter. Mississippi State brought Jay Hughes, who played 6 snaps last year. And I know Jay Hughes well, and got to know him over the years. He's a great personality. He actually worked the room really, really well, and was pretty funny today. And that's probably why Mississippi State decided to bring him. But at the same time, it's a guy that played 6 snaps last year.
Yeah. Well, folks, 2 days in the books at Media Day, 2 days to go. We'll have Ole Miss coming up later in the week, and that's what we have for you now from Hoover on location at the Hampton Inn across the street from the Galleria. You can see this is an authentic hotel room here.
Luxurious.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you're getting to see the luxury that we live in.
We even made the bed.
That's right. Or somebody made the bed. Thanks, folks. Come back and join us later.